Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy Midlow. I'm the chair of the Transportation Advisory Board. Meeting starting at 6:05, the October 23rd meeting. We will start with approval of the minutes. If anyone has reviewed the minutes, Yeah. Okay. And there's no suggested changes or revisions. Okay. Well, in that case, by unanimous consent, we will approve the minutes and move on to public comment. Doesn't seem like we have anyone here or online. So we will get started on the regular business with the Central Issaquah Station area visioning and guidance principles. Comments.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tab, for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Thomas Eldred. I'm a senior transportation planner. Tonight, I'm hoping to get your feedback on the draft Issaquah light rail stationary vision and guiding principles. And had a couple of questions for the tab. First, want to know if you agree with the vision and guiding principles as presented, and would also like to know if there's any changes you'd like to see. So just for background, and this tab has seen this several times at this point, but we are expecting growth in Central Issaquah. Specifically, we're expecting 2/3 of new jobs and housing between now and 2050 to be funneled within Central Issaquah neighborhoods. More specifically, we are looking at the green box, which is the Regional Growth Center boundary. So this neighborhood is envisioned to be a dense, walkable, and urban neighborhood. It will be especially supportive of the light rail. So this density will be made possible by the fact that we are expecting high-capacity transit in this neighborhood. So again, this is the light rail extension that we're expecting around 2041 to 44. So this is the South Kirkland Issaquah extension. This was made possible by a ballot measure from 2015 called T3. So the region voted and approved this ballot measure, which provides funding for high-capacity transit expansion, including the development of a Central Issaquah station. In March, Council approved and adopted the light rail station area planning guide. So this is the city's official playbook for future discussions with Transit. And amongst other things, it includes information on prerequisites for what the station area should look like in order to be supportive of light rail. Also talks about the project timeline that we're expecting, some key considerations for Central Issaquah, being that it is end of the line and has some very specific challenges and potential benefits that we can harness. Looked at some potential station locations and also includes a list of actions that the city plans to take for the next couple of years and beyond. I'll just pause here to see if there's any questions before I so we are here today to get your input on the light rail stationary visioning and guidance principles. And just to sort of level set, when we talk about the station area, we're really talking about the half-mile to quarter-mile vicinity around where a future station could go. So this is sort of the area that's considered walkable within walking distance of where that station is. So in short, we're here today to just sort of get a feel for like what you would hope to see and experience within the station area vicinity. So this is that first action item that was recommended by that planning guide. So this is this can be considered the first of many actions that we will be taking to plan for light rail. So to get here, staff reached out to over 75 community-based organizations and other groups in the community. We held 3 pop-up events. We had a really successful multilingual community survey. It was taken by 805 respondents throughout the community and beyond. We then took learnings from each of these steps and we developed focus groups. From these 75 organizations, we got some folks from the community that would be really good to chat with to really dig into some of these details specific to light rail planning and stationary planning. So these 7 groups with 28 members represented various interests. I'll just read these to you. We had folks from the community at large, transit riders, mobility advocates, folks with limited English proficiency, human services organizations, developers, major property owners in the community, seniors and youth, as well as some sustainability advocates. So we got a pretty wide range of voices in the room. We really wanted to walk through a lot of these key issues that were brought up through the station area planning, the planning playbook that we're working off of. Really dug into a lot of these details from here, as well as through all the comments we received from the community survey and through public events discussions throughout the last year. Have now come to this point, we've really funneled down and really fine-tuned all the comments we've heard, and that's reflective of the vision and guiding principles that you have in front of you as attachment B. So I do have a copy in front of us if we want to look at that. I think that many of you have also read this before this meeting, but there's a copy in front of you as well. And just to sort of walk through what we've done so far with the other commissions. So first we ran that through the Economic Vitality Commission. They had a lot of really good feedback. They wanted to see more focus on sustainability and safety. So that was added to the vision statement. And in this attachment B in front of you, you can see the track changes where all that has been incorporated. Other discussion points that they brought up were making sure that, so there was 2 other guiding principles that were brought together because they were a little bit too similar to each other. So that was sort of one key interest they brought up. They're also really interested in making sure that safety, accessibility to employment, tourism, making sure that parking is right sized. These are all things that were really important to the Economic Vitality Commission that have not been reflected in the guiding principles. Then took all these changes, brought it to the TTC. They had some other great comments about parking, walkability, making sure that there's lots of development potential, more emphasis on sustainability and environmental impacts, and so on. Then, this was last week, took all this feedback through to the Human Services Commission and Equity Board. Had a joint meeting with them. Again, we added more focus on equity within the vision and guiding principles. Some words were changed around to emphasize the true meaning of what we're getting at. And then more discussion on safety and accessibility and so on. So really, we're hoping to just keep rolling with this. I think the tab has a lot of good feedback to add to this, and we've ran it through lots of boards and commissions. And at this point, I'll pause here and see what other feedback I can get.
When you say accessibility, does that cover the ADA accessibility? Yeah.
It's ADA accessibility, but also just general accessibility, making sure that the station area acts as a hub to other parts of the community as well.
I have a question. Just kind of overall, I'm curious, were there some specific themes? I mean, I saw some of the comments in the board, but in all those pop-ups and all the general community, did you get any surprises? Did you get any findings? Did you find any conflicts? Anything that where things were, and what were the I'm interested in the points of contention and how do you make trade-offs? Like one of the comments in human services is about the word salad or the word, the word soup or whatever, but I just was kind of curious, were there any contention points or key themes or any surprises?
I guess I'm not surprised because I've been doing this for like a year. So I've heard a lot of different opinions on the matter. But yeah, I mean, we're a big community and there's differences of opinion on how we get that end result. So a lot of concern around safety and security in the area.
What do people mean by that? Are they talking about personal safety from like personal, like criminal attacks? Or are they talking about cars, or, you know, impact, like?
I think it's both. It's certainly both. But I think in the way that it's typically presented is the concern about like nefarious activities in the area. That's sort of been a big topic of discussion. This year specifically in like the transit world, like Sound Transit and King County Metro are really trying to make sure that riding the bus, like riding light rail, or like that it's a safe and like pleasant experience. So that's sort of the flavor of a lot of these. Yeah. Just to add to your, I'm just going to keep rolling with the things that I heard. Parking was the major concern. That was, there's a lot of concern about ensuring that the neighborhood continues to be a walkable, dense neighborhood. That's really important. But also understanding that because Issaquah is at the end of that line. So really, like, without being too prescriptive, like recognizing that parking is going to be a major decision point. But this doesn't go so far as to prescribe like how we address that problem. There's many ways to address it, but without being too prescriptive, because we haven't done a full-blown study yet. Just acknowledging that we need to figure that out.
When you say address it, like, is it the number of car parking spots, or is it like having car parking on?
It's, I don't want to be too specific, but there's different ways to provide parking. You can provide it literally in the center of town, would be one scenario, or it could be within a proximity, so that it's still a resource, but maybe it's not the focal point of like the light rail station itself. So there's many examples around the region where parking is provided in different ways. Sometimes it's not provided at all. And there's you know, forecasting you can do to sort of figure out what that parking number will be. But also, like, we have to acknowledge that, like, this is a community that, like, we cherish, and we don't want to make it, like, just a big parking lot for people on the east. So balancing that while staying true to, like, the central Issaquah vision is going to be really important. So we want to just sort of keep that in mind as we think about where a station could go and sort of how that stationary mix might look relative to, like, the other competing needs that we have presented here in front of us.
Do you think this vision statement helps clarify how you would decide about, you know, sort of the extremes or where we fit in the middle of a parking lot versus, you know, no parking for, you know, broader than just walkable?
Yeah, I don't think that the vision statement nor the guiding principles are too prescriptive, but they do sort of describe the different forces at play. And taken all together, it's clear that, like, we probably don't want central Issaquah to be just a huge parking lot, because that wouldn't make it a walkable, dense, like, friendly area to, like, be. But we do acknowledge that parking is super important, especially for folks that don't live within walking distance of that station area. So
Yeah, when I read it, I think that there's some foundational aspects that are missing that would lead to, you know, establishing some tenets that would be useful to use as a decision basis for how much parking we put in, for example. And namely, like, the reason we're putting in light rail in the region in general is because the region's growth. Right? And we need to scale the solution where you don't overwhelm transportation networks. But from a transportation specific perspective, we need to, I think, specifically say in here that we're expecting a certain amount of growth, but we want to focus that growth in areas agreement on that helps guide a lot about, do you do that as like an intermediary where people are driving to it, but then, because I think it forces you to do that forecasting, like, if we meet that guiding principle, have we achieved a sustainable, scalable, efficient network by putting in that parking or not? I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, just to add to that idea, the intent is to build off of the vision and guiding principles to have specific, things that we can measure. I hear what you're saying, though. I think that's a really great point.
But there's no point in here to say we're building a light rail so that we can support more people in the region.
Sure.
I just have one more question. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think kind of adding on to what you were saying, I feel like there's almost a little bit of, conflict about whether this is something where you want a parking lot or not. And the document does noticing under the accessibility and connectivity guiding principle. The first line says that basically says the light rail station will be a key local regional transportation hub. But then in the community part 3 of the document, it says that the light rail station should embody the warmth and charm of this Issaquah. So I feel like that's almost kind of conflicting, because one thing is saying, hey, we need to make this a regional connection hub, and the other thing is saying it should be a charming small town. So I think that's almost a little bit.
Are you, just on quick, it sounds like you don't think that they can use both, right?
No, I think that they can be, but I'm just how you're saying that we're going to step off of this document. I feel like that can then be easy.
Okay.
Yeah, it might help to give examples of cities that have done a good job blending those maps. Because when I think about it, I tend to see one or the other, but I can't think of good examples of doing both at once.
Okay.
I think everybody is saying that within the MIT now, but some of those decisions that it is better connecting in the region. So that's off the top of my mind as I was reading through this. I know that, like stations in our city, where we have those in mind, but I don't try to have a balance with you.
Yeah.
Just want to go back to the public input. Did you get primarily Issaquah businesses and residents, or did you also get people that would be using this from other communities?
Yeah, I don't have the figures in front of me. I believe it's an attachment C. There's some summary statistics, but racking my brain here, I think it was
What was your intent? Were you trying to reach the community of Issaquah primarily?
we were getting a very broad net. So I think we got feedback from 30 cities in the area. Primarily it was Issaquah and Sammamish, if I remember correctly. We did get a lot of Bellevue and residents and Seattle. So we got it from all over the region. It was very broad feedback, but primarily it was from Issaquah folks.
Yeah, 34% of respondents outside of lived outside of Issaquah. Most of those Spanish and Belgian. Yeah.
Wait for the round in case. Anyway,
I have more of a wonder, I don't know if you would be able to answer this, but is this something that whatever tax equivalent of Bellevue, other regional cities, is this something that would also be different than even the stations not in their city? But I guess I was curious kind of what their feedback would be too. I don't even know if that's conversation or if that was in the community outreach aspect, if that was a group that was targeted, or what if we are broadening that right beyond folks in the city, which it looks like we were. And I know there was something called the daily too, trying to reach out to Seattle.
Yeah, other city CAP equivalents were not specifically reached out to. At this point, we're really focused on just sort of getting our community's vision on what we're hoping to get. Sound Transit will certainly be reaching out to other area cities. But our goal is really to get ahead of all that and say, okay, this is what we want. You know, a couple steps forward after we do like sort of finalize all this. Our intent is to develop a study to like dig into those details, come up with a couple alternatives that the community is like sort of interested in. We'll then refine like how our community like prefer alternatives that will be fed into the larger Sound Transit process that cities like Phoenix would be a part of.
I was just gonna say that I feel like this issue about parking is kind of the road, but generally serving the greater community versus building this vision for the city of Issaquah is like the central conflict and challenge of this whole thing. And I'm wondering if that should be a little bit more, this just sounds like wonderful. It'd be wonderful if we could do all this. It's like, but I just wonder if it might be useful to identify that challenge right in the vision, you know, in the overview of the vision statement or the vision and guiding principles, but be explicit so that people can really be thinking about this for a long time. And I mean, hopefully this has been done before. I'm having a lot of trouble wrapping my head around how it's not going to just be this giant parking area for people coming from elsewhere. And I'm all for all these community aspects, but I don't know how you hold the line. I think a lot of political will. And it just seems like we might as well start having that discussion about how challenging that is right from the get-go. I don't know.
I'm just worried about the sky, the creepy, like a giant, massive parking infrastructure, and I'm worried too that when this is built, if there's people, if we don't balance this, if we won't achieve the goal of better connecting with the region, if facilities aren't adequate, it's my worry, big worry, but not, and therefore I think there's a,
I mean, I think it's just a massive conflict to reiterate what everyone is saying. You know, how do we approach this? You know, we might be talking about right now, for example, you know, I went to the side of the Eastgate or Merced, and I take a bus into downtown. But so it's at some level it is kind of great for me to be saying, no, we're not going to do any parking. I think it was for the peripheral, even more peripheral people to come in and, you know, take out the rest of the way to town because I'm doing that most of the time when I go to downtown. And so there is that conflict, I think. How do we approach the situation like the periphery and allow people to come periphery while not be compromising on that development and all that stuff.
I was going to add the thought about connection to the station area. We are expecting better connected buses to connect, so there will be some alternative in the future. Is what we're told. This is playing out in other communities that have just gotten light rail services being improved, better connected to park and ride, to the light rail stations themselves, and vice versa. So all that to say, there are things happening that will also support not needing to drive, but we also do acknowledge that like some people simply will not have options to not drive. So we want to grapple with that to make sure that this really once in a lifetime investment in the community, we're like taking advantage of it and we're doing it right because we will not do this again.
I think maybe one of the ways that make some statements that people might say, and then talk about how many people are going to say that after we build the light rail station. For example, now I don't use a car to live in Issaquah, right? How many people are going to say that after we build the light rail station? Or my commute time is decreased. Right? These are sort of like microeconomic focused statements where they're the perspective of an individual. There's also macro versions of this, like now Issaquah can support an extra 50% of people living in Issaquah, people working in Issaquah, or an extra 10,000 people can now work in this area. And then there's also primary and secondary effects of that, where the primary effects would be like, yeah, I take the light rail directly. Secondary would be, well, I can't take the light rail, but now I can drive on 90 because 10,000 people have taken the light rail. And so you can blend across those and you can say, what are we really going to achieve with it? With a very direct statement. This specifically is achieved by what we built. I think you can see some of those into the vision. Yeah, we're running up against the word limit at some point. But those are very concrete. So I think big in the top 5 that you want to achieve with, or that we all want to achieve with. Really helpful.
You were raising your hand?
Yes, I did. My one comment is that I think in general, the traffic's going to increase. And even if we have light rail, it's not going to free up I-90 or other roads that much, but it is going to accommodate more than increase in traffic and demand, whether it's on the road or on rail. So that's, even though if we increase busways, transitways, bat lanes, or rail, it's still with the increase of population, the roads are still going to be congested because people have different alternatives to get in or to go from one place to another.
So you don't want to compare like 2024 with 2040, whatever. Because obviously we're going to change that. But I think there is a way to compare alternatives, even if we're projecting, say, we were projecting this and now we're projecting this. And so this many people have their projected commute time reduced by
You want to turn to that thread about what you were pointing out with the first part here, like a regional transportation hub versus what we were discussing here would be third part, right? With that language there with the what and charm of that small town regional transportation hub, and how does that can get integrated and provide input about that.
If I could just add, just for context, I probably should have mentioned this previously. These guiding principles, these 3, these are all like key things that have just been heard throughout this process. So, accessibility and connectivity, this really just talks about like the transit hub, making sure that there's like, different options to get to that transit hub, acknowledging that like Sound Transit is bringing it here because they want to provide service. They're not as focused on like sort of how the neighborhood develops around it. But this is just like that first part, connection, like literally transportation connection. The second one is talking about the types of land uses and sort of like the vibes that you get in the area. And then the third one is about like the way that you feel in that area, making sure that the station itself really does feel like an extension of the community. Examples that we see are like at Eastgate, for example, when you're driving on 90, they have like salmon that are like built on. They're like just an art feature that feels like it's it's an ugly parking lot, but there's salmon on it. So like it has some semblance of like what it is to be in this area. So the community connection can be sort of felt when you're standing at that buffet. You feel like there's like salmon around you, like that's that's a really poor example, but like that's just the one I thought of was a great moment. So the stage, yeah, these were like sort of the three like really main features. And so you can, Avi, you can say like, yeah, there's like, it doesn't seem to like match up with like I think we were talking about like it being a regional hub, but also like feeling like it's part of the community. So, and maybe that's something that can be like sort of fleshed out a little bit more in terms of like what that might look like. But yeah, this is basically just a reflection of like all the different flavors that we got from so many different locations.
Okay, does anyone have any thoughts about fleshing out that? Or that's a good idea.
I had a question related to that, which was, does Soundtrack have any particular service projections or amount of service that we need to hit before they actually agree on the next big? Like, do we need to project 20,000 commuters per day or something like that?
They do have projections. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was like 8,000 riders at our station. It was fairly low, but it's because it's at the end of the line, so it's sort of just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so we would, at some point, be making an argument that, yeah, so many of those are locally walking to the station or riding bus or driving and parking there.
Right.
And then we know what that distribution is going to look like 20 years from now.
There's forecasting. It's not very accurate. It's basically like a linear growth from like what they see around the region now. So it's not super accurate. It'll get more accurate as time goes on. But yeah, it's the modal split is exact. It's kind of hard to say at this point.
You can imagine part of the vision might be to take a stand and say, we want this to be modal split, 90% walking, 10% driving, something like that.
So that's, so we're looking at most, but are there any other ideas for how we flesh out? Conflict, we do see a conflict in that.
What was the experience of other cities with like Amplify? Are there similar experiences?
Yeah. The ones that come to mind are like really bad examples of like what you wouldn't want to do. And our guiding,
That example in the end result, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. The one that comes to mind that we are learning from is Ingle Lake, like the end of the line. Yeah. So they basically, they got light rail and development never came. And it's just like a huge parking lot for many of the communities south to reach light rail. So that's sort of, I think, what the community would hope not to get. We would like to see development because, I mean, Ingle Lake had this opportunity to like really grow and like have really targeted growth near the light rail station, and it's like nothing ever happened. It could have just been a product at the time, but like it's going to grow a little bit now, but it really like has not become what it could have been. And like Issaquah is obviously like a smaller community. It's also at the end of the line, and there's like natural features that we really cherish. People love the mountains, they like hiking, they like all the activities out here. And that's sort of a way like we can have that as being one of the focal points is like, this is your access to the mountains. This is your ski link to the mountains. That could be one way that we approach it, while still maintaining like what we all appreciate about the community. Or we could just sort of not keep that in the center of our decision making and just sort of let transit build a 500 stall parking lot and a massive light rail station. And then we sort of like hope Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem great because the community really did not, like, Ingle Lake did not benefit really that much. And now you have more traffic coming in and like nothing to show for it really, so.
What about, the north, is it Linwood? That end of line also, or,
Yeah.
do we know?
Yeah, it's a little early to tell, because I think they just opened not too long ago, it was like August 30th. But yeah, we're learning, every time a station opens, I'm trying to go out and write it, and like, community members are writing it, and like, it's been great, like some of the focus groups that I had, I was with around the time of the new starter line opened, so a lot of those conversations were like really timely. We were talking about, you know, so-and-so station really like that, the station didn't like that, like, why didn't you like it? Like, well, because these reasons. So yeah, as, you know, we're assuming, and as far as we know, South Transit's been telling us like 2027, that's when we're going to approach the city. And every year between now and then, we'll be updating our guiding document, making sure that it's still fresh. We're going to be meeting with, you know, Linwood staff, Redmond, Bellevue staff, making sure that if there's anything they've learned along the way, we can sort of incorporate that. But there's lots of good things to know about like how things have shaken out with Sound Transit, but also ultimately we want to make sure that it like feels great for the community. Some examples are like Redmond, that they were able to work with Sound Transit because they wanted this key feature to connect their stations. So they worked with Sound Transit to add on to their project because they saw like if we add on to this at this time, we can save money by like adding on to your contract with whatever construction company like build the station. That was like one example of like something that another city did, and it's at the right time, and like they were able to like really improve and make that station like feel like a genuine extension of like that station.
From an architectural point of view, or from a?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like Redmond, for example, there's a connection to, I think it's, there's an office like across the highway, so they have like little painted pieces, shoot, I forget which company it is, but it's almost like 8-bit because it's like computer pixels, so it feels like, yeah, like naturally, like this is where there's a tech company across the street, and like this walkway feels like you're like walking through a pixelated like feature, which is just one example, but like it makes sense for that area. Like it feels like, oh yeah, naturally, like this makes sense.
And are you looking at other case studies outside our region as well in terms of particular ones? So, similar to our community, getting linked up into a larger mass transit. So,
Most of the research was in this community, just based on like previous Sound Transit projects, but Sound Transit, assuming that there's federal funding, will follow a specific timeline. So the timeline assumptions that we have are based off of a federally funded Sound Transit project. So I think that kind of answers your question. Like the learnings that we got from that is because like funding from other transit agencies, they've all received this type of funding. So like Sound Transit, therefore, like will follow this process.
That's more than.
look at the Sound Transit conference risk. Any other comments or questions? Do we agree with those?
So, really small things, but, right here, yeah, the subdivision, the last sentence, this is create the atmosphere that reflects our community's positive image. I would like to say maybe like, et cetera, like the schools, the residential issues. But I don't know, I think like images hold like a certain level of yard looking at that, but, I think a lot of what's in here and, maybe some of the other work that kind of like sort of thing. I think that's like my experience of just kind of organization. Like, look at this is really important. So, that's my.
Yeah, no comment. I think it's good.
Okay, and then any other feedback on whether you agree generally with it? Okay.
So I think there's a lot of potential for other conflicts to be included in this as well. So, you know, for local walking versus regional, the driving in, that's clearly a conflict that we've identified. It seems like a vision statement is most useful if it can help resolve those conflicts or help try to consensus. And so the fact that it's not really focused on what conflicts might arise or how to get past that.
Kind of like comment earlier.
Yeah. Great comment. Yeah. Just front loading the hard conversation. You know, I can agree with that, like you're going to get a discussion to happen.
Because this isn't going to be a multi-year.
Oh, yeah.
Many
Many years.
And nudging in one direction. And then start getting people engaged in that one direction and start, discussing the options. Get that out there right now, so that people are arguing about it. And figure out what the best solution is.
I agree with what you guys were saying. Just kind of adding something about the conflict. That's a good idea.
Cool.
We have one more thing. Well, we're ahead. We're kind of talking about this as kind of like a point in time, like relevant. But there's also a lot of stuff preceding that and a lot of stuff going after that. So like establishing a time frame for especially the growth in the area. Right now, it's like there's basically no residential stuff within that half mile. But presumably we're talking about that's going to show up. Is that going to show up 5 years before? Show up, 10 years before?
I will just add, we've been really planning for growth in Central for a long time. And council has approved a pioneer program to try to spur some growth, but we've been hoping for it. We've been trying to make it a great environment to do business and like develop, but market forces just have not cooperated. So can't really add much of a timeline other than like we hope it's real soon. We want it to come.
I might try to shift from hopes to identifying dependencies. Like this vision is going to fall apart if we don't have a certain amount of growth by a certain time. And the two are also coupled in a way that like if you set the vision, like, hey, we expect to have this amount of residential here, that can spur that development. It can spur people thinking about like what's really blocking that and get more than council involved in it. There aren't a whole lot of local developers that own this want that land, but probably something could get checked out there.
You get everything you needed?
First of all, the first sector uses and experiences, recreational uses that catering to diversity. Cater.
Gotcha.
The same as sponsoring, somebody changed the agreement issues that time. Somebody changed form of the verb and then not the following.
Go through that. Yeah, it could be a possibility from the track changes.
Yeah.
Cool. Appreciate that.
You got everything?
I did, yeah, I appreciate your time. Just wanted wanted to add one last note. Our goal is to take this to City Council as the next step in the first quarter of next year. So between now and then, we'll just be refining it. Open to more feedback. If you had anything at this meeting that you just wanted to share with me later, I'm happy to accept that. Yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Sounds good. Okay. I will break the meeting order for a little bit, because we have Councilmember Gray joining us, who is on the Mobility Committee on Discipline Council. So, you want to step up here?
Committee work.
Yeah.
No, we hate doing that. First, thank you for all you did. That was a fascinating conversation. I loved that. I'm so excited for first quarter and it coming back because I just noticed like 2 times where I had to sit in my hands and I was like, no, this is great. Thank you for the invitation to join you because this is, we get so much input from the boards and commission, and as the chair of the mobility and infrastructure, the CAB is clearly our biggest feeder board. So we get lots of information from you, and it's just wonderful to see you all, A, in person, and then B, and most importantly, just to listen to the exchange and the thoughtful dialogue that's going on. It's like, how do you deal with something that's incredibly amorphous, almost, let's say 15 years, because I'm feeling optimistic today, 15 years away, and with all, and I love the conversation about the conflict, because there's a lot of potential, like, is it this or that, or how do I resolve that? So I think one of the big challenges we're going to have as we move forward with this is, at some point, we have to put one, anybody camp, anybody ever put the tent, at one point you got to get one corner of the tent down, or you never get any of the tent down. So at one point, we're going to have to nail in our first corner of the tent, so that we can then lay out the rest of the tent. And I think that the hardest one, and that's kind of my sense of the conversation I just heard, was, okay, how do we start to nail down those first things so we can start building on it? So thank you for inviting me. I'm enjoying the conversation. I also, if you have any questions for me, I'm certainly happy to answer them. I think you guys are amazing. I've worked with them for years.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll enjoy it next.
I know the next one I know I'm going to enjoy because we heard this one already and we kicked it back because just a little foreshadowing for you, John. This is one where we were going to do streetscapes on Squat Mountain, right? And we're going to have to, to perform with a streetscape, we're going to have to cut down all these trees. It's like, that's dumb. We're not doing that. But we need to have some sort of guiding principles and something that we could put into an ordinance so we had something to point to and say, here are the conditions under which we're not going to do, we're going to have an exception instead of saying, well, we don't like this one, so we're going to accept that. We want to have some criteria. So not that one wasn't cool, but this is what I'm looking forward to. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Have a good
Well, with that, we'll move to introduction to chief standard.
Okay, well, you know me, I'm John Michael Friend, Transportation Program Coordinator. I'm joined this evening by John Morrison as well, Transportation Engineering Manager. We're going to give you an introduction to street standards landscaping. The big discussion will be next month in November, but we wanted to bring an intro to this topic for you. There we go. So the purpose of this presentation this evening is to introduce the landscape standards and to provide an overview of the proposed modifications. The notice direction needed is for the next meeting, where we wanted to get these questions and ideas kind of planted during this session so that you can start thinking about it during the presentation and throughout the month as well. So those questions are, does TAB support creating specific project types that would be exempt from the standards required for developments or redevelopments? Does staff support not adding a landscape strip to protect mature trees? Does staff support not adding a landscape strip to protect wetlands as a part of wetlands mitigation sequencing? Based on M&I's direction, as he mentioned, are these the right guardrails? And are there areas of concern missing from this list? So first, we're going to run through standards. Very exciting. So first here we have from the Issaquah Street Standards Design Section F. I'll just read it out. Landscaping in the form of planting strips with street trees shall be required consistent with IMC 18-606-170 landscape requirements on public properties and rights of way. This typically includes a minimum 5-foot wide planting strip with street trees between the curb and the sidewalk for landscaping and appurtenances. The city engineer and community planning and development director may approve a deviation to reduce the landscape strip requirement. Switching over to the municipal code, 18-606-170 that was mentioned. All pedestrian facilities must be buffered with trees and shrubs appropriate in size, scale, planting type, and character to the type of facility or sub-area. Street trees must be planted in a planting strip with a minimum between the sidewalk and the back of the curb. And street trees are required for all project applications required to provide frontage improvements in the right of way unless the director approves a deviation in accordance with IMC 18-606-190. That says, an applicant may request a deviation from the street tree requirements in that code if all the criteria over that code and the following criteria are met. The applicant demonstrates the deviation addressing the public safety risk. And that's the only deviation reason. So then, going back to street standards, street frontage improvements are required for all new development and redevelopment, including any development that is a conversion of use from residential to non-residential, except for any single-family construction on existing lots. Such improvements may include, but not limited to, curb and gutter, sidewalk, street storm drainage, street illumination system, traffic signal modification, relocation or installation, utility relocation and undergrounding, street trees, landscaping and irrigation, bike facilities, and street widening per all these standards. So, what does all that mean? How does that impact what we're talking about? So in our conversations, specifically kind of stemming out of the Squaw Mountain project, CPD has determined that only a safety issue can warrant a deviation away from the planter strip rule. Recommended designs for the Squaw Mountain project, we got permission to move forward with those that don't include the planter strip due to the impacts of up to 179 trees and 231 estimated root impacts. Having a safety-only deviation for planter strips increases impacts on the environment and neighbors' driveways and yards. How does this compare to our actual city policies and goals? So in the climate action plan, prioritizing the retention of healthy trees, in our comprehensive plan, we want to protect natural environment from negative impacts of human activities, maintain the forested character of older neighborhoods, that includes Squaw, and conserve and protect environmentally critical areas. So now we're going to run through some of the criteria that we're thinking about changing, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're coming from. So this is Northwest Maple Street. There's a big, quite a sizable wetland area over there. So this is what would happen if we wanted to basically redevelop this area or improve even this area. We would have to, under these street standards, basically extend into that wetland area in order to put in that planter strip. Otherwise, we can't touch that sidewalk or road, I think. In the code, we have avoiding impacts, a statement about avoiding impacts to wetlands, minimizing impacts to wetlands and associated buffers, and again, mitigating for impacts to wetlands. We have several of these pieces that highlight that. This slide is from my presentation to M&I, or was it council? To them, to the council members. So this is from the Squaw Mountain Non-Motorized Improvement Project. So basically, this is just a 300-foot stretch of Mount Olympus, and the way it's laid out here is from the center line, what are the required elements that we would have to include if we want if we were to redevelop this street. So we have the road right-of-way, the bike lane or shoulder, landscape strip, and then the sidewalk on both of these sides. The red are driveways that would be impacted. Some of them would get steeper, etc. And then the orange dots are eyeballs, not exact, but pretty close. All the trees that would be impacted or probably need to be removed along this 300-foot section alone. So this presents a major problem because this, the overlay of the tree canopy is a sizable amount of the canopy in the picture. Our code has plenty of tree protections, tree canopy coverage, minimum tree retention requirements, and also we are required to, whatever tree we remove, we have to replace it somewhere else in that sub area. So for example, if we were to take out all these trees, we would have to replant these somewhere else on Squaw, and Squaw is very forested, so it might prove an issue. We like it, but it's tough. So now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about rehabilitation.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're wanting to talk to the town about next month is creating within the street standards different classifications or types of projects to distinguish between projects where we're redeveloping or developing the street and other types of projects like rehabilitation projects. And so we've got a couple of examples that I wanted to introduce you to. The first one is on 190, oh, can you call that? Yes. Yeah, 191st.
190? 190.
Yeah, 190. So there's 190th and 191st. If you're at the zoo, you start heading up the mountain. The road's really rough because there's a landslide area. We hired a geotechnical engineering consultant earlier this year to look at it. They came up with a fix. And in this area, it makes sense that we want to take care of the road, but we don't want to, there's no pedestrian connections, there's plenty of trees, so we don't need street trees. And so just to codify into the street standards that these projects would be treated differently, that the focus would be on preserving existing infrastructure and not changing the function of the street. Next slide. And so just kind of similar to what John showed earlier, this is just a cross-section view of it, of what a fully developed street would look like 190th, where we'd have planter strip, sidewalk, but we're just wanting to take care of the existing infrastructure. Or at least that's what we're proposing. We want your feedback on it. The next slide. Another one that fits into the rehabilitation project is the Black Nugget Retaining Wall project. This is the aerial photo of it. It's the retaining wall behind Fred Meyer, and it's a wall that the city has projects to replace. Next slide. And so we hired a consultant who's been helping us with the design. And from an economic point of view, the best way to stabilize that retaining wall is to actually build a retaining wall right in front of it. And then that really limits the space because we're not adding room. Right now, there's no planter strip and there's a center turn lane. And so by putting the retaining wall in front of the existing retaining wall, because the priority is to preserve the existing infrastructure there. We're not trying to redevelop Black Nugget. It makes it so that way, really the only way you could put in a planter strip would be to prevent the wall with bigger, right? What's the reason? The biggest concern is corrosion and the tight ice. Okay. All right, next slide. And So in addition to looking at classifying rehabilitation projects as a separate type of project, also wanted to get your feedback on, do we want to create a new type of project called, and I just called it interim bicycle and pedestrian connections. And the whole idea is going back to the strategic plan. The strategic plan, one of the mobility objectives is to create near-term connections and efficiencies in the mobility system. And as we started working towards that, we ran into some obstacles where we're trying to put in short segments of sidewalk, and we're trying to be really economical about it. And we're told that when we get to permitting, oh, you need to fully redevelop the street and planner strip. As John mentioned earlier, there's a standard for undergrounding. So an example of an area that we hear from the community a lot about is the 2nd Avenue Northwest. And it's a little street connects Juniper and Holly with Gilman Village on the north end and Confluence Park on the south end. And residents who live there would love to be able to safely walk to the park or to Gilman Village, maybe get coffee or lunch. And so they go through Issaquah Fix and other ways of reaching out to the city to say, hey, can you build sidewalk? Right now there's a sidewalk gap in front of 3 parcels. And you can see it on the left. But if we were to construct that sidewalk as the standards and code are written now, we need to underground the overhead utilities, install a planter strip, when I think the request that comes from the community is keep that existing sidewalk and just connect it. And I haven't done a cost estimate, I'm guessing to fully develop it versus just connect the sidewalk is probably 5 times more expensive. And so that's why we want to look at creating a type of project for interim non-motorized connections. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, this is just showing what we would have to build here. And it gets really expensive. Next slide. Another one that, as an example, in North Issaquah, where the school district has their offices up at 220th as well as 51st. This is a corridor that does not have bicycle facilities right now. It's supposed to be redeveloped eventually as a core street. But if you look at a Strava heat map, there's a lot of people riding bikes through this corridor. And so it'd be a good place to do an interim bicycle connection project. The illustration on the left is showing the existing street where you have a center turn lane, you've got sidewalk, and then on the right is the concept of how we can create an interim bicycle connection where just do some restriping, remove the center turn lane, and we could add bike lanes. Next slide. And so then this is the core street. This is what we, long run, we want it to look like. There's actually a development in for permitting that will build part of this core street, but there'll still be a lot of the core street that won't be constructed. And just trying to think of how can we more efficiently and safely have bicycles and pedestrians be able to move around the city. Okay, next slide. All right, that's you, John.
All right. So, as I mentioned at the top, these are the questions that we are going to want to discuss next month. But at this point, if there are any questions about anything that we presented, I'm going to open up the floor just to answer those if there are any.
Just to do a rerun and everything. So, like a quick list. What are the big project types?
Yeah. So I think we would have, well, we'll put it in the materials for next meeting, or I think so. I'd have to look at the schedule to see if we've got multiple touches on this. But initially I'm thinking rehabilitation projects. There would be the interim bicycle and pedestrian connections, we would have redevelopment or new construction type projects. They have to meet full standards. I think bridge projects. Think about it, it's a visit list. Street standards, let's say. Yeah. I think those are the ones.
From this conversation, are we initially discussing our feedback about this or questions?
For today?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at questions in general.
Yeah.
Question, scoping question, is it always the city that's the actor, the applicant, in the case, or private developers as well?
Great question. I think that's something to talk about next month.
Okay, yeah, it'd be really nice to have kind of like a matrix, like who's the actor, what are the restrictions, what are the requirements versus acceptable exceptions.
I think it's, a good idea. And as you were asking the question, one of the things I was thinking about is the street standards also apply to parking lot. And so below Black Nugget Road is Fred Meyer, and they've got a retaining wall that was constructed at the same time as the city's retaining wall. And how would their process of going through getting it permitted if they wanted to do what we're doing? So start thinking of how does it apply both publicly and privately?
And presumably we want the same rules for the two actors, or maybe we don't.
I will say in the past, the direction we've received is to have the same rules, and so I think that would be a policy discussion. I leave it to the board to get feedback, but I think there's a lot of, make things a lot easier if everyone's going to have the same rules.
Yeah, related to that would be, the city is going to act with a certain set of rules in mind that include things like including the tree canopy. Private developers are not necessarily going to have the same motivation, so we might have different requirements or different motivation in some way to encourage private development to actually materialize the way we want, instead of just, assuming that, private developers are going to act in the best interest of whatever city, whatever city they're at.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why one of the questions is, are these the right guardrails?
I was wondering what you meant by that. Are these meaning, just with the city's reason that?
So I think that's something that will be more clear at next meeting, as we start working through what the guardrails would be. But one of the things we heard from the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee is we have standards for a reason. And so if we're not going to be going to the standards, we do need to have some guardrails on it. So as we think about these discussions, we want to think of what are the guardrails, because obviously we do have standards. Trying to think back. I think one, when we're doing a big update to the city standards, that really want to work through the process of going to the, in this case, the tab, appropriate folder, getting feedback, and working its way through the committee before then it goes to the council. So then take our time and do it right. I think the Squaw Mountain was so obvious that why would you cut down a 60-year-old cedar tree to plant a decorative street tree? But this is really to work out the details of less obvious circumstances.
Yeah, the two questions we brought to council was basically, hey, can we take these designs that don't include the landscape strip, make it public, and then can we come back and talk to you about this more? That was sort of one. When he says kicks back, it was more like, let's start the process. Yeah.
I can imagine a scenario where you've got a developer that is developing and has to go through this, and the city would like them to save the 100-year-old cedar tree. But the code says, they may apply for an exception, and the developer's like, I won't cut that down. And so
so this, that, basically for extra areas of centers that other private, treat that, and then there's this topic that you spoke right now, other kinds of.
It's also kind of public versus private, but are we asking for not just exceptions, are we also asking for, if it needs to deny a permit application related to the exception that we think we want on the city side, to sort of force developers to make similar decisions or end up with the same result.
I was just gonna say, I kind of thinking about it slightly differently, but kind of the same thing. It's, all the examples that you described are things that the city's in the business of building the streets. And so it is the city is the project proponent in that case. So I was thinking, as I was listening to that, is, are there other examples, come to your last point, of the areas of concern missing from this list? I don't know, but what I was thinking was, are there examples where a private entity might be likely to be the project proponent that we haven't thought of just because it's a project, it's not the city being the, so this is your bread and butter, right, roads, and so it's easy for you to think of examples where this would be relevant, but it seems like we just want to be really thorough and make sure there aren't examples that are very logical where a private developer might be the project proponent. That would run into kind of some of the same ideas, even though they're not in the business of building roads, or there are other things that they might be in the business of doing that this is. And I can't think of any, but it seems like this is a good time to answer that question.
Well, I would say.
So it's not so much was the project proponent is public or private, it's who's usually building those kinds of projects. They just have, I don't know.
Well, actually, so a lot of times when a development goes in, they build this frontage, so they are building a road. And they do come up with examples, situations where there are trees that make sense to preserve as they're building the frontage. So I do think we can think of it both from our bread and butter perspective, but also from the perspective of an applicant who's wanting to redevelop a parcel. They might have some trees and
they might run into more things that should be on the list that we run into. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any, but these might work out. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I have more, or someone to find like basically more. Because I'm not going to know what I don't know. Like that is probably. But I'm going to think about it 2 days, but pretty much between that.
Kind of, but I really like the way whole, I don't know, second chapter, but just give us an introduction, exactly what this is. It's not fully baked in urine, this doesn't have to be fully baked, we're not giving kind of, this is great. So I really appreciate giving a chance to get an introduction, start around it.
That's awesome. A little bit more on we have standards for a reason, what are those reasons, just to lay them out and be very clear about it, why are we actually holding those reasons? Yeah, when we make the exception.
And so like, I don't want to get into a situation where we approve an exception for specific things and then, years down the line, like, that's either, like, abuse somehow, or, yeah, I'm not very worried about that, but yeah, it's just adding more weight to the conversation.
yeah.
Yeah, I think like kind of one of the questions of kind of like what you were saying, Erica, is kind of just about like how do we decide the exceptions, because do we have anything about that yet?
Have we decided them?
Or like how we approve or deny the exceptions, or just kind of standards, or?
So right now, it's the director that can approve.
But only for one reason.
Right.
Right, so we want to leave it, but if we added more exceptions, if we added somebody else could approve it, or.
Or not, just like what the exceptions are, that you can like use to not
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, not great, but that's the other thing.
Yeah, basically the situations where a deviation or exception, depending on the
Yeah.
terminology we're using, and that's some of the stuff that John and I have begun working on. We've been working with staff, and certainly, okay, what type of tree are we really wanting to preserve? Trying to define it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And we've met with the planners to talk about, okay, what are the wetlands we really must avoid, and give that information. Yeah.
So there are sorts of guidelines to having these exceptions, like when it comes to safety, comes to environmental impact or something like that, right?
Right now, it's just safety, and we're wanting to put other,
Or something like wetlands,
Yeah.
like the environmental impact, like,
yeah,
needs to be studied just to make sure that down the line, we don't have like long-term impacts taken away from wetlands.
yeah,
Because that's what's happening, like, yeah.
right. And so right now, yeah, and as we met with the planners in community planning and development, they have categories of wetlands, and they say, these ones absolutely do not. These ones, I think you want to have critical areas to evaluate the buffers, and similar, you want to have a critical areas that you, and those are some of the details that John and I have been working behind the scenes and trying to put together.
It'll be curious to figure out, like, kind of what I know, but, so right now, there's just, we've identified as one exception for streetscape meters, like streets. Are there other categories of development where there are other exceptions? And I guess I would be interested in looking at those when those come to play. I know, I mean, that might not apply because civic, whatever, but yeah, I think that would be like one framework for this, because I don't want to make it so narrow that it's like, well, what kind of tree do we, yeah, we don't want to preserve some, like, vibrant family, if that needs to go, that's okay, but, versus, but I don't want to get so narrowly prescribed with this that we make it impossible for like the next thing that comes up beyond a long time, that we have to go back to the drawing board and kind of do it all over again. So, I think just right where to make it.
I mean, ultimately, I think these standards are about, particularly like component, like it is about incrementalism and emphasizing that value for the, but I guess that's the next meeting to discuss more fully, but I think a lot of this does have to do with incrementalism, what at least that like aspect behind advertising that you know, you can transform the whole street, I guess, do a little bit. Yeah. Looking forward to the conversation next month.
So, we got one time here on this, right? Have we done a complete survey of all the streets in this plot that, you know, just kind of like eyeballing it, thumbs up, thumbs down, street standards should apply to the street standards should not, because of various exceptions? Like, there are a couple of examples in here, the Dogwood and 220th, where like, you look at 220th, nobody would say street standards should apply to that. Or sorry, 190, not 220. Right, yeah, 190. But other streets would say, yeah, generally they should apply.
So, okay, so I'm gonna make sure I understand your question. Say the question again.
Yeah, we say, we look at all of the streets in this plot.
Right.
And we say, all right, this street clearly has a bunch of exceptions, and the street standards are probably gonna not apply to that anytime in the future, such as 190.
I don't know if I have a comprehensive list. I kind of in my head collect.
Where they had to go.
Yeah. It can be I start hearing, actually, it's really the requests or complaints that I hear from the community that I kind of look at what our tools are and what we can and can't do and what we want to do.
Yeah. I think the reason why this matters is we start thinking about like how many times are we going to go through sections.
Right.
If we've got a street where we're looking at it and we clearly don't think that the standards work well for it, if every time we look at that, we have to go through the exception process again. And then it's not just one street, but it's half the streets in Issaquah that apply to that. How big is the problem?
But we're not talking exceptions for particular streets, we're talking exceptions for certain projects.
On a particular street.
Right, but
Well, yeah, because, so, here's another way to think of this. Let's say it was on Northwest Sammamish Road / Southeast 56. And if, let's say that the pavement is just failing, and we need to do a big rehabilitation project, or we need to dig down all the road, get down subgrade, and rebuild it because the pavement's falling apart. Well, then that triggers a site work permit. A site work permit says you have to meet the full standards. Now, all of a sudden, this project where we're wanting to just take care of the pavement, if we don't treat it as a rehabilitation project, then technically we would need to have planter strip, move the sidewalk out, and it would grow as a project. Right. So what we're wanting to do is say, okay, in this case, it's a rehabilitation project. We're not changing the function of the street. We're wanting the street to just, as it is, last for another 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So I guess as far as I was trying to do.
Oh, okay, sorry. So I guess the rehabilitation, I can see it applying everywhere. The interim connection, it's more of where there are opportunities to do that.
So a couple of projects that we've looked at recently, Black Nugget Road, where we said it was just not enough space to apply the same standards to it. And the other one was the Swat Mountain, where we said the trees are essentially, we want to preserve the trees, and those street standards should apply. We looked at different ways of doing that, like, sort of like asymmetrical, sort of like going in one direction but not full and exceptions to that. Which I think, I get the feeling that there are many, many streets in Issaquah that have those sorts of general exceptions, but the long-term plan is not likely to be one of the established standards for the street. And so that's why I asked about, kind of, have we surveyed all of them, or do we know, are we really thinking that everything eventually is going to be each specific street, street standards, and we're just talking about delaying it, or are we talking about long-term, just missing a bunch of other street standards that should apply, or we just have general exceptions where they will never apply?
Let's come back to that one. Inside my head, I had a whole bunch of can of worms open myself.
Another question? Go to the next steps and timing.
Yeah, so next steps, we'll come back next month, and then the council process will push it to early 2025, basically. So, yeah, thank you.
Do you want to come back up and move earlier and ask any questions or have you?
Well, I'll certainly come up and mention and field questions. I didn't mean to offend you by saying we could get back to work with a joint decision that it needed more attention, so I was maybe a little bit flippant. But can I just opine on this one for a second? This is one where I think we're all kind of on the same track, which was, we looked at it and said, the code ought to be the code, and if we're going to have situations where the code doesn't apply, we should try and get ahead of it. So we're really hoping that you can come back next time we get together, is to identify what those exceptions should be. And I think John and John did a really nice job of these kind of exceptions. But if there's other things you could think of, it's like, well, this kind of thing, or
that kind of thing. But, my biggest fear, and I'm not an attorney and I don't even live on television, but my biggest fear is that we apply standards differently to ourselves and, our private, enterprise, and they take exception with this and we find ourselves in court. And so we want to have a code that holds up. So that's where I really want to, see how we can close as many of these gaps as possible. So, I appreciate your thoughts on this, and I'm, I think it's a challenging problem, and I love the work you guys did, since last we talked about it. The rehab, that just makes so much sense. If we're just rehabbing the road, that was not the intent of these street standards, was for rehab road, but it fell into it, so let's be clear on that. And then, what the two that we took action on around Black Nuggets and the retaining wall and Squaw Mountain and the trees, that was a case where it's like, yeah, that's what we do, and it's just counterintuitive. So it's like, no, it just doesn't make good sense for the city. So, but having something where if you're doing that work on 190th, you don't have to come back to city council and say, I need an exception because for this, I'm going to be, and I've driven that road. There's nothing on there. There's no place. You're going to be cantilevering out over the abyss to put that in there. So it's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So it seems like the city has goals. Those goals are often in conflict. And the code should allow us to get to the right compromise. And in the case we look at the conflict between things like standards that we want, from aesthetics and disability versus environment or cost. I think that the Black Nugget Road was cost primarily. It would cost us a lot. We would have that, and probably there were environmental reasons as well.
And we could have done it.
We certainly could have done it, but it wasn't the right thing to do.
Right.
But when you talk about those conflicts, I think one of the challenges I see is that if the code says the applicant is the one that's trying to drive towards the right resolution, that's where you will see deviations. And you probably should see deviations between the code as it applies to private actors versus the city.
Yeah, possibly. It's interesting. Let's just pick on the tree one for a second. I mean, we have tree ordinances. And, if you got to cut down a tree to do a project, there are things you have to do. So, what we have is probably conflicting ordinances that we have to sort out. So, but yeah, I'm excited to see what you come up with. It's a good thorny problem to dig into, and I love this approach of let's put it out on the table and let you chew on it for a month, because I'm sure we'll get better ideas after you have a chance to percolate.
Does anyone have questions for Councilman Gray? Not only for one guy, but generally to work on the work of mobility and infrastructure committee and how to tie it to what we do here at the time.
It's relatively new to the committee,
Sort of, kind of.
and I'm curious, is it helping when you then take those matters to council, full council?
Yeah, so here, kind of a little bit of background on committees in the city council. Up until about 5 years ago, I guess maybe, we had committees, and there was a mobility infrastructure like committee. And then we did an experiment with this idea of study sessions. So instead of having a subset of the council go and address a particular topical area, we had everybody kind of address the topical area. So we did that, and then after a couple of years after doing that, we took a step back and we said, no, I think we want to bring committees back, and we gave us a subset of council an opportunity to sort of specialize, but more importantly to dig in and understand the issues in a little more detail than when you've got, Audit 7, because it's not a linear thing, right? It's logarithmic, the number of interconnections between people goes up exponentially if you add, another person. So it got more complex. I was an advocate for going back to communities. I think they work really well. I think the communities have better conversations about the issues than the council as a whole did. So, and we're able to get a little more into it. And I think this is kind of a neat model of inviting understand it kind of at a different level. So, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate how the committee structure has enabled, us to lead us on better with the council. Because we do have, three people who really specialize on that particular topical area, and so you can reach out and they want to get, combo for,
Yeah, so the real rub, and this is really unfortunate, I know that Councilmember Hall and Council President Michelle would love to have been here. But because we are a governing body, we would have to have a notice of a meeting. If two of us showed up, that would have been a quorum of us. So you can only get one of us at a time, but we will commit to making these meetings as much as we can, because I think it's good. But yeah, when we first started talking about this, like, yeah, let's go, and it's like, no, we can't do that.
How do you consume the results of this meeting?
Me personally?
Yeah, so if you weren't here today,
Oh, I watch you on TV.
you watch it.
Yeah. It's not the same. You're much better in person. It's sort of like Beyonce. You're better in person. And then, the staff does an exquisite job also summarizing the feedback. We also, if there's something coming with that's entry mobility, we'll generally watch the recordings of that meeting. Sometimes I'll be honest with you, I'll watch it 1.5 times. So you sound better too. We got something that touches equity, who wants the equity board, and it's trying to really understand what the dialogue was that shaped the information from that. All right, but I'm gonna go back to my back seat, and I want to hear your reports. Anyway, thank you again. Thanks for everything. You guys are. I was telling them you guys are my favorite entertainment.
Well, thank you for coming.
Okay.
Okay. And with that, we'll move to report. So, tell us board work.
Yeah, board work plan. Speaking of squawk, I think last month I mentioned that we were going to push it coming back to tab until next year. Just kidding, we're coming back next month. So we looked at the schedule and it just made more sense that come back next month. So that will be good, and then of course we'll be back next month as well to talk about landscape standards. The only other thing is on the work plan, there's an annual report. I have a draft created. They approved it. I'll send it to you and Tom. It's just basically outlining what we did this year, and then we'll send it off to the mayor and council.
You mentioned, the reschedule.
Oh, yes. And you have December off also. So we decided to give you off December. And then November will be a special meeting. Let me get that date. Because it would fall Thanksgiving-ish. We have it on the 21st. So Thursday the 21st. Yeah. So yeah, Thursday the 21st. So if you all can make it next month. And that's all I have.
Great. Okay. And then,
Question is the annual report, do we all get a copy of that too with yourself finalized?
If you want.
I don't know.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. All TCs have about that. Yeah.
great.
Cool.
Staff report.
I'm going to invite Emily up to give staff report.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
I'm the department director, department director. And, I will tell you that I am bringing some budget in. We have had a very challenging budget development year. We have both the revenue and expenditure problems that we're trying to solve as staff, and council will be thrown in the thick of that, helping us to figure out how to manage our priorities with
It sounds like the firing is all.
I'm not, but I have some news along those lines. So I will tell you that my voice cracked because we have had some very difficult conversations in the last several months. It became apparent that our construction-related revenue in particular has not performed to the degree it needed to in order to meet our expenditures for 2024. We're looking forward to the next biennial budget. Those revenues can't be expected to return to anticipated levels quickly, nor keep up with inflation. And we certainly are incurring higher costs in several areas. I'm not going to give you full budget presentation, but I will tell you the parents here how you can get connected to better information, how you can listen in on the council deliberations if you choose to do so. So revenue has been a challenge. Expenditures never go down; they always go up. And so we every year for this game of pushing out where those two lines cross, right? Those expenditures and trying to solve for that problem every year. This year has been more challenging because that gap is quite wide. And so the city staff, city administration, mayor's proposed budget will reflect really hard choices that we have to make. There are reductions in services, there are reductions in capital projects, and there are reductions in costs. Okay, so what does this mean for TAB and the work that you do? This means that some of the projects that we anticipated bringing to you, either to get them early moments of feedback on conceptual design and policy kinds of choices that we normally have, maybe some of those are delayed. It also means that one of the services that you all have worked really hard to help shape and bring to Issaquah is proposed to be cut, and that is the metric flex on standards. There are lots of choices every year in the budget, and the city council has a very difficult job of trying to make sure that community priorities are met, and that we take care of the mortgage first, things like that. We are also affected by reductions in staffing in public works, and one of the most significant ones that we local feel is John is a limited term employee, what we call an LTE. He knew this upon his hire with the city, that it was a limited term position. We have very few of those in the city, but we do use them in multiple departments. Sometimes they are set up to be indexed to a certain project, or when that project is complete, term is over. Sometimes they are indexed to some sort of growth factor, where we know we have some sort of spike we need to attend to with our staffing levels, and then we're going to return to more of the baseline level. So John in particular was brought on to help us get Metroflex off the ground, and he did that. He did a great job pulling together that project, getting community enthusiasm behind it, bringing it forward to council for their support, and it has been a success. So it's a really hard thing to contemplate, because it feels like we just got it out. Try out its way of describing. So I know many of you are going to be disappointed hearing that news, and this is the proposed budget. It's not the final adopted budget. I'm going to be abundantly clear about that. This is one of 100 choices that city council have to wrestle with. We had hoped for quite some time that we would convert John's position. We have advocated for that. We built it into our departmental proposed budget to convert that position to an FTE, full-time equivalent employee. In addition to Metroflex, I mean, I want to be clear with all of you, you know some of the work that John has done. That work is not going away either. Just because Metroplex has launched doesn't mean that there's still the work within the public works department that is going to be impacted by him not being on our team. So I wanted to share with you just a little bit of what John does that he's not at the forefront of his brain. He's worked on our community trip reduction program. He handles the variety of our C-Click fix issues. So those are our portal for customer service with our community on transportation-related issues. He's been heavily involved with community engagement efforts around transit and students, also future capital projects. He's been involved with those planning efforts like Untitled. He's your liaison. He's assisted with other transit coordination issues and opportunities. He's been an absolute advocate for options in our community. He's a multimodal fan, and so he's eager to try to get Issaquah at the table competing for those dollars. He's developed our new traffic calming program. It's going before council, and has coordinated Bike Everywhere Day, and that's a short list. And that doesn't even sum up what I think is most important about John, and that's that he is a very creative person. He's a fantastic collaborator. He doesn't care, who you are. He just wants to work with people that have the same sort of passion that he has for these subjects. It's a great can-do attitude. We have thrown a hodgepodge of things his way, and not once did he say, "Yikes, really?" And instead, he has said, "Okay, I've never done that, but I'm willing to try. Tell me what I don't know. Help teach me." That is another thing that I love about him, is that he is always running hard and eager to learn. And that's really important, because if you don't know this about John, he was not one of those kids that was born thinking, "I'm going to do this transportation program when I grow up," right? And so he has come into this role. He has found his calling, and he has had other jobs, other schooling, but this is where he has landed. It is the right place for him. He's fantastic at his work. I have no doubt that he's going to serve some other private sector company, or I sure hope as an advocate of health service and the local government. He's going to do great things for them. John's limited term was set to expire at the end of this year. Again, that's what is called for in the proposed budget, and we will try to keep him entertained for as long as we can until the end of the year. But I wanted to bring this news to you now. It's a little awkward for me, especially as a council member in the room. The council hasn't received the budget yet, and I'm sure hope that Councilmember Ray had one-on-one with the city administrator, and did get permission to have this conversation with all of you.
That's tomorrow.
So, there's a little bit of letting the cat out of the bag tonight, but we thought it was very important, given that your next meeting is not until they're going to be eyeball deep in budget deliberation. So we wanted to hear the news. Now, also, there's a possibility that John Feinstein has great things for her next cabinet meeting. And so I wanted you all to be prepared for both that possibility, but also for the conversation that will be happening over the next few weeks before city council. But here's my ask, though. We typically do not leave big policy choices like this, or news about service education or layoffs to the
So my ask to you is that you just hold on to this information for a few more days. Council's gonna get the budget on Friday. Monday evening, we will start, to hear more details. So here's a proposal for the budget on November. Deliberations, and it's, their job to get something passed in early December. So that's our timeline. But if you can hold on to this, and I know this is a public meeting, but if you can hold on to it, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your input until they get, deliberation. I would be great. And timing just wasn't perfect, but we wanted to bring this to you. Okay. That's my agenda item. John, thank you.
Really appreciate you. It's not our week,
I mean, there's not really any words. I appreciate sharing, and I know it's really difficult. It's been fantastic. So yeah, we work together. Oh wow. Yeah. It's tough, but I appreciate you sharing it with us. I'm zero doubt that you will find a great spot. One way or another. But.
Because the business of the city will go on, we will need another liaison. We have not begun to really think about that yet. So we'll be getting back to you about how we're going to proceed in the future. No, it's not. It's stuck. Yeah.
First time it's real.
First time it's real.
How many turf board people board?
So they're starting, you know how, so basically driving into Issaquah High School around kind of where the community center is, and then also there's other kind of little shortcuts people take to get to school faster, and the Issaquah Police Department is starting to send out tickets, especially I saw them ticketing people who drive to the community center, which apparently they were giving out $600 tickets, is what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not. Didn't get a ticket, but yeah.
That's good.
So that's good, because there's been a lot of complaints about, through traffic going through the neighborhoods. I don't know exactly if they were ticketing, there's this one alleyway, I don't know the street name, but it's this really narrow alleyway, and people are turning left onto Second, and then that's kind of always chaotic in the morning. I don't know if the police department has been taking there, but I know they've been getting out of the community center, and also sometimes people, instead of going all the way to the light where the high school and middle school is, the official entrance, they go from behind the middle school through where the buses go, and that's also not allowed, and people are going through there. So it's kind of just good to see that the police department is taking control of where it's doing things.
And I'm sure that could use but I'd like to have to.
Any other business or announcements? No? Okay, well, in that case, we will adjourn the meeting at 7:55.